We are the Berkshire Schools Eco-Network, and we're doing a presentation on food, farming, and forests.
Approximately 5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are created by animal farming. This contributes to climate change, causing the North and South poles to melt, which means that animals such as polar bears have to move out of their homes and into villages, and also leaves communities such as those in Africa in drought, and they therefore don't have a reliable food source. Big factory farms, such as those that McDonald's use, often do not prioritise the health of other species and destroy habitats. This causes farm animals to become sick and wild animals to lose their homes. The loss of habitats and therefore biodiversity also includes the loss of pollinators such as the bumblebee, which reduces the amount of food we produce as bees transfer pollen from crop to crop, meaning that we will be impacted by the loss of this biodiversity.
So I'll be talking about the impacts that our food actually have on the climate itself. So in total, agriculture and agricultural industry emit 24% of the global greenhouse emissions. And as you can see by the diagram, red meat and dairy products produce the most greenhouse gases. So these are things like pig meat, lamb, cheese, dairy cows, and beef, which is at the very top. And as you can see at the bottom, you've got fruits and vegetables and nuts, which produce the least greenhouse gases. Nuts, in fact, help restore the land they're grown on, meaning they're actually good for the environment. This is why it's so important to really think about what you're going to eat. By limiting the amount of milk and dairy products we eat and also meat, or even trying to be vegan or vegetarian, you have a clear impact on the world around you. This is because the less high greenhouse gas emitting food we eat, the less money farmers will make from it, and the less they'll grow, instead growing more environmentally friendly foods. This means there will simply be less greenhouse gases being released into the atmosphere, which is, of course, a good thing.
A farm which many Berkshire Schools Eco-Network members lived close to is Waltham Place. Waltham Place is a biodynamic farm, meaning that it is mainly self-sustaining, and it also has a greater positive impact on the world than organic farming. It has been organic since the 1980s and biodynamic since the 2000s. To protect the environment, it maintains its biomass so that it can be used for soil conservation. This means that they use waste products to ensure that the soil remains healthy. They do this because there are only 50 seasons left of phosphorus in the soil and 60 seasons left of harvest in the soil due to soil degradation. Their big phrase is, "It's not the cow, it's the how." The animals are fed with feed grown on the farm, and they use holistic grazing techniques where cattle are moved to a new grazing area every day so that soil degradation is reduced and the land receives an equal amount of fertilisers from the animal poo. Organic farms produce 20% less crops than normal farms, resulting in less profit. But organic food has been proven to be of a better quality and more nutritious than non-organic produce. Waltham Place also contributes to local areas' biodiversity. By having log hives for bees, they do not take the honey from these bees, as they want them to be self-sustaining themselves, and these bees choose to come to the hive and so are not brought to it. They also have a worm farm. They are supporting the 25 species of butterfly, 400 species of moth, and 8 species of bat in the area. How can we make a difference through the food we eat? Discuss with your family about how you can make your food choices more sustainable. Ask yourselves, does it come from an animal? Think about whether you can cut down on your intake of animal products. Where does it come from? Buying locally reduces your carbon footprint, especially if you buy from organic or biodynamic farms, such as Waltham Place. Would it naturally grow in this season? Buying seasonal produce reduces your carbon footprint, as energy is not needed to maintain the conditions for a different season. For example, if you grow strawberries in winter when they should be growing in summer.
It's also really important to think about farming's impact on the climate itself and the effect farming practices have on the planet. So, 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture, forestry, and other land uses. That's almost twice as much than all the cars on the planet. Livestock, which includes all animals used for farming, like chickens, cows, and pigs, account for 44% of human-induced methane emissions and 53% of nitrous oxide emissions, which are both very bad greenhouse gases. This is because methane is produced through, firstly, digestion in cows. The reason that cows can eat things like grass and humans can't is because they have these little cells in their stomach that let them eat them. However, these little cells also produce lots of methane, so every time a cow eats, it produces methane. And if humans eat lots of cows, then farmers will want to breed more cows since they're making more money from it. And the more cows there are means there's more methane being released into the atmosphere, which is, of course, really, really bad. The second most common way that methane is produced in terms of human ways is through rice paddies. The natural way that rice grows often results in the production of lots of methane. Another important thing to think about is the impact farming has on land itself. Most forests and land have developed over centuries to become carbon stores. So the ecosystems help take carbon out of the atmosphere through plants and store it in trees and the ground. Cosmo will talk more about this later. But excessive and bad farming has meant that these carbon stores are turning into carbon emitters, since we're cutting down trees and turning them into farmland, which produces greenhouse gas. They're also really bad for the environment. Another way poor farming practices are bad for the environment is due to the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizer. Use of these chemicals can lead to a loss of biodiversity, as they kill really important animals, and they are often really bad for the soil as well, since they cause soil degradation. Soil degradation is when soil becomes quite bad quality and is no longer suitable for things to grow in. It's one of the biggest problems with the environment right now, since poor farming techniques are leading to more and more soil being degraded. Every year, around 24 billion tons of fertile soil are lost due to erosion, and soil stores about 4,000 billion tons of carbon. By way of comparison, the forest store 360 billion tons of carbon alone. Fertilizers can also pollute water since they can leach into water reserves and bodies and be toxic for living things. An issue that feeds into all of this is the fact that we have an increasing population that needs more and more food. Some might say an easy solution to this is just to start using more land, but this often leads to deforestation, the loss of habitats and natural ecosystems, and biodiversity. And a final really important issue is also the use of water. Many sectors need really large amounts of water for farming, which may cause water scarcity and drought. And the constant exploitation of soils can also cause erosion and compaction, leaving them useless for future generations. Climate change's effect on farming and food poverty is also really, really important. Climate change has serious effects on the weather, climate patterns, and major events. Things like more droughts or monsoons, inconsistent weather patterns, landslides, floods, and changing temperatures. All these things, which are often very extreme, mean that it's a lot harder for farmers to grow crops and food. For example, a long drought with no water means that crops won't grow, or a decrease in temperature where it gets too cold also means that crops won't be able to grow. This means farmers can't sell as many crops to make money and provide for their families. These families often have to go hungry for long stretches of time and go into poverty. Less food being made also means food becomes more expensive. This means a lot of people can no longer afford food since only the wealthy can get it, and a lot of these people slip into poverty. As I said earlier, climate change's effect on land also means that more and more farmland is becoming unsuitable for farming. If there's less land, it's a lot harder for poorer farmers to keep sustaining themselves, and therefore they can slip into poverty. Unfortunately, these kind of scenarios are happening all the time already. If anyone ever tells you that climate change is going to be a problem, or it's going to start having an effect, remember that's not true. It's already having really serious effects on millions of people, and that's why it's up to us, who haven't really been hit by it too hard yet, to make a difference. One really important thing is also to remember that, for the most part, the farmers are not at fault. Even though we discussed a lot of farming practices that are responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, we must remember that a lot of the time, farmers, especially poorer ones, don't really have a choice. Right now, for most farmers, the choice is between providing food for their families and doing something that will help the environment, but force their families and themselves to starve. And if a farmer is making twice as much money by producing beef than, let's say, peppers, then of course he's going to produce beef. That's why it's really important to do things like eat less meat and eat more vegetables, because that means that the farmers won't have to make the really difficult choice between survival and protecting the environment. it means they'll be able to do both at the same time. That's why it's also really important for the government to make policies about how farmers can farm or help support farmers who are trying to be more environmentally conscious.
So how can we make a difference through the farms we use? Ask yourself, are they environmentally conscious? Research into farms in your local area and find out about those who are eco-friendly, such as Waltham Place. How can you make your voice heard? Contact your local MP or George Estes, who is the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or Boris Johnson about how you would like them to secure a safe future for our planet through a sustainable agricultural system. And perhaps mention protecting soils from degradation or insects from pesticides. And ask yourself, how can I learn more? Just for fun, educate yourself. Read books or watch TV shows and read articles about the importance of sustainable farms. And now I will pass on to Cosmo.
Yeah, so I'm just going to talk about forests, which I know Yash and Phoebe have already slightly touched upon. So there are lots of reasons why forests are so important, but the first one is they're really good carbon sinks. So carbon dioxide, everyone's heard of, it's that greenhouse gas which causes global warming, and forests actually absorb this greenhouse gas. Every year in the UK, 23.1 million tonnes of carbon dioxide are released into the atmosphere by the UK, and that's the UK alone, so not other countries. And obviously carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, so this is really bad. It warms the atmosphere, causing climate change, global warming, the wildfires that you see at the moment, all the drought stuff that Phoebe and Yash have been talking about. And it also dissolves to form carbonic acid, which is really bad, and it means that rain, lakes, rivers, and oceans become weakly acidic, which dissolves shells and coral reefs. But the good thing about trees is that they absorb carbon dioxide and they actually release oxygen, which is what we use to breathe. So they absorb 14 tonnes of carbon dioxide per acre of woodland, oak woodland, which is what we have in the UK. So that's why forests are so important, because they can absorb tons of carbon dioxide. And an average tree itself, just one tree, absorbs 10 kilograms of carbon dioxide every year. So the second important reason why forests are so important is biodiversity. Forests generally host the highest biodiversity of any habitat across the world, and there are so many different types of forests. But the most famous one is obviously the tropical rainforest, and tropical rainforests are the most biodiverse ecosystem in the world, more than coral reefs, more than anything else. And they have over 50% of the world's biodiversity, and biodiversity is the number of species per unit of area, and species obviously are different types of animals. So tropical rainforests, one habitat, has over 50% of the types of species in the world, and that's between 3 million and up to 50 million species of plants and animals and everything else. But the important thing is that there are so many different types of forests, so it's not just tropical rainforests and the ones that we see when we look out of our window. There are tropical wet forests, tropical dry forests, montane cloud forests, coniferous, taiga, deciduous, etc. And coniferous forests are the ones that you can see is that photo on the top right, and obviously tropical rainforests are on the bottom right. And also the other important reason in terms of biodiversity is that forests support so many keystone species. Now, keystone species are species which lots of different other animal species depend on and wouldn't be able to survive without these keystone species. So, for example, you have hornbill birds, and you can see that's the really colourful photo of a bird here with an enormous bill. Now, they're really important for distributing tree seeds and fruits. And lots of trees wouldn't be able to survive without them distributing their seeds, which can then grow and turn into more trees. So they're really important, and all these tree species wouldn't be able to survive without hornbills. Agoutis is another tropical animal. It's a rodent and it lives in the Amazon rainforest, and it is the only animal that can eat the Brazil nut. Now, the Brazil nut is obviously incredibly hard, so that's the reason why it's the only one that can eat it. But also, it means that the Brazil nut tree cannot survive without the agouti, which means in turn that all the animals that live on and in the Brazil nut tree wouldn't be able to survive without the agouti. So that's how an agouti, for example, as a keystone species, can cause the collapse of an entire food chain. Harpy eagles are another reason. They're an apex predator, which means nothing else eats them, basically. They're at the top of the food chain. Now, because they're at the top of the food chain, as their numbers change, their numbers in their population changes, it affects all the monkeys that change. So the more harpy eagles, the less monkeys, which means etc., etc. But all the stuff that the monkeys depend upon and influence will all change in turn, and that's all down to the harpy eagle. But also they're the last strongholds for many species. So in the UK, wet deciduous forests are our climax community, which means that if you leave a piece of land, then over thousands of years it'll grow up into a forest, because it starts with shrubs and grasses, and then it gradually grows into a forest. And they are important for our most charismatic species, and famous species such as red deer, which you can see there's a lovely picture here, foxes, badgers, etc. So something that people often don't think about is the medicinal value of forests. Because they have so many different types of plants and animals, there are lots and lots of plants from tropical rainforests around the world which we use as medicines. So 120 medicines that we use today, which are prescribed, come from tropical rainforests. And these might be pioneering techniques from animals, or it could be actual plant extracts. Furthermore, 2/3 of anti-cancer medicines are from tropical rainforests. So these are ones which don't treat cancer and aren't used to treat cancer, but they help prevent cancer from forming in a human. And the global market for these medicines is over $60 billion, so a huge amount of money for medicines which come from forests. And the best known example is curare, which is a poison found in the South American rainforest, and it's used by indigenes in their famous blow darts to kill sort of monkeys and gorillas and birds. But in fact, although it is really poisonous, it is also used as a medicine. So it's used for anesthesia. So if you have an operation, you might be given a form of curare to make you go to sleep. And it's also used as a muscle relaxant. And that's the same with lots of things. Lots of poisonous compounds are actually used as medicines. And quinine is another example. It's from a plant, and it's used to treat malaria. But of course, with anything, with any type of extraction in tropical rainforest, at a commercial level, it is really unsustainable. So if a big company goes in and they try and take all the curare plants, then it's going to probably destroy the tropical rainforest. So it's usually only sustainable at the community level. And that's if you can't cultivate the medicine in Western labs, basically. But you might think to yourself, well, actually, I'm just an individual. What can I actually do that's going to affect and help protect our forests? The answer is there is so much you can do. So, for example, you can rewild your garden or any land that you have by planting, for example, a wildflower meadow or planting wild hedging with hawthorn and blackthorn plants. Basically, you can see here there's a picture of a field which was left to go fallow, which is the same as rewilding. And you can see on the left, it's agricultural. On the right, you can see the shrubs starting growing. So the point is that if you rewild your land, it will help protect our forests and increase the biodiversity of the area. You can also work with your schools to provide nature or biodiversity areas. So if you decide that there's actually that little bit of land which no one's using, but you'd like to turn into a nature area, then you can do all sorts of things to encourage animals to live there and increase the biodiversity. Also, if you've got local woodland, which is owned by your local council, or you're lucky enough for it to be your own, then you can try and, for example, make it less polluted by picking for plastics, or encouraging the biodiversity by planting different things, or that kind of thing, which you can ask your parents about. Also, you can campaign to raise awareness for the protection of your local woodlands. So obviously, if you've got big infrastructure projects which are going to threaten forests, which you know about, then you should campaign at school. You should send a letter to your local MP, that kind of thing. which will really always raise awareness of these issues and raise awareness of our forests. So the answer is there is a lot that you can do to help protect our forests. Yeah, so thank you so much for listening. I know it's not been too long, but anyway. So our vision is a world where we live in harmony with nature. And a pledge that everyone can take is to raise awareness about the issues of food, farming, and forests through contacting your local MP and the government, or even making your own posters and that kind of thing, or campaigning at school. And we also have a call to world leaders to invest in biodynamic and organic farms and rewilding schemes across the world to ensure that food, farming, and forests become a sustainable aspect of our life. Thank you very much.